24b, and we are at Folio, about a quarter of the way down. First word on the line is Hamashasa Kalbai. Ibelu Hamashasa Kalbai.
Okay.
Hamashasa is the first word line, maybe 15, 12 lines down. Hamashasa Kalbai shel Chaveroi beChaveroi. If somebody instigates one dog to attack another dog, Mahu, what's the story? Who has to pay? The Shasa Vade Potter. Certainly the instigator is exempt because he didn't do anything. Balkelav Mai, but what about the owner of the dog? I know my avidnalei. Can he argue that, look, I didn't do anything, my dog wouldn't have done anything either if not for this instigator? Or can the victim say, look, you know that your animal could be instigated, so therefore you failed to watch it. You should have been more careful. So Amar of Zera says, Toshma, in the Mishnah, how did we identify a tam? One of the opinions was the opinion of I believe it was Rabbi Yossi in the Gemara and Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah. How do you define a tam, a naive animal, an animal that was formerly habituated to do damage and now is no longer habituated? The kids could play with it and it doesn't get angry. Okay, and that's called a tam. Let's say it does get angry when the kids play with it, chayev. Then the owner of the animal would be liable, even though the animal is being instigated by the kids. Right. So Amar Abai says it's not a good proof. Why? Mikitani noga chayev dil mahon agach loy have a tam. Why here negicha loy mechayev? Abai says it's not a great proof because all the Bryce is coming to say is that the negicha doesn't make the animal. If the animal doesn't gore, that proves it's a tam. But it could be that if it does gore, it's not a tam. But also you don't have to pay because the kids instigated the animal on their own. It doesn't prove that an instigated animal is required to pay. Tashma, another brisa. Shisa brisa kelev, shisa brisa nocha. She instigated either a dog or a snake. Potter, he's exempt. My love, what does this mean? Potter mishasa, the instigator is exempt. The chayev bal kelev, and the owner is chayev. The Gemara says not necessarily loy ema potter af mishasa. Maybe the instigator is also exempt. But the owner is the instigator is also exempt, but the owner is in other words, not just the owner is exempt, but also the instigator is exempt. So those are both exempt.
The instigator, okay, are you saying the situation is where someone's dog went on to someone else's property and started a fight with the dog that belonged in the property, and the dog belonged in the property killed the dog that wandered in, or what are we talking about here?
It appears that, so it looks like we're talking about Karen. Karen is abnormal behavior, violent, you might want to say violent behavior, but by an animal that hasn't been habituated as such, so it's considered abnormal. And it was instigated. That means that another guy was, I don't know, you know, instigate an animal. He provoked it. He teased it.
He teased it. Some guy teased him.
Something like that. Yeah. No, there was a what do you call it? There was a hornet flying around, and he sort of got the hornet to go crazy, and then it stung somebody. You know, I'm not sure who had the pet hornet in the first place. It's a separate story. But if the instigator would be liable, by the way, you wouldn't need to have a pet hornet. The instigator is not liable because it's not his animal. Okay. She say who ba'atzmai. 1 second. I'm sorry. Omarova. Imtim Slam Shas Kabash Chaver Bechaver Chayev. 1 second. What did they translate this? I think this is referring to the guy, the instigator himself. Is that the provoker? Did they translate this?
You say there's a name of
Rafa.
Rish Lakish as the rule here for Rish Lakish said, if they're talking about the two.
No. Before that.
Before that.
I'm a Rafa.
What is the reason for my rule? And whenever one acts irregularly.
No, before that.
Right. Even if you conclude that where a person incites one's fellow dog against another fellow, the dog's master is liable.
Okay, that's it. Okay. So if you say that even a provoked animal still creates liability for the owner of the animal, potter. Let's say the dog attacks the provoker.
Mhm.
So guy provokes the dog and he gets exactly what he deserves.
Right.
Right? The owner of the animal is exempt. Why is this? My time. I call Mashana Rashina by Potter. This is a key concept which we'll explain in more detail in a moment. We already mentioned this earlier last week. If somebody changes from the normal behavior, i.e., like you provoke a dog, and then the dog changes from its normal behavior and acts violently to the provoker, Potter, you're exempt. And the Gemara will explain another example. Rava says to Rava, we have a statement from Rish Lakish that supports you. The Rish Lakish says, you had 2 oxen in the public thoroughfare. Achas revutza v'achas mahalachas. One decided to lie down in the public thoroughfare, and one was walking. Ubata mahalachas berevutza. The one that was walking kicks the one that was lying down. Petura, he is exempt. Why? Because the one who lied down changed from the normal behavior. You don't lie down in a public thoroughfare. And therefore, if somebody changes from their personal behavior and acts violently toward that animal, the owner is exempt. Revutza b'mahalachas, but if the animal lying on the floor kicks the animal that's walking, then chayevas, and you're chayev because it had no business kicking. That's the statement of Rish Lakish. So it appears that Rava agrees to Rish Lakish. So Amrullah, so Rava could respond to Rish Lakish, and he would say, Rava's example of somebody who made a change, in other words, he provoked an animal, and because of that, he triggered another change. The animal attacked him. That's different than this scenario. In other words, Rav is saying that even though in the scenario of the dog, I maintain that the provoker, the owner of the animal is exempt from payment to the provoker who got what he deserved. In this scenario, the animal that was walking had no right to kick the animal that was lying down. And therefore, I would make the walking animal who kicks the lying animal, I would make them pay. Live it be less charashusa. If the walking animal had walked over, had trampled the animal that was lying down, that would be acceptable behavior. The animal is allowed to walk anywhere it wants in the thoroughfare, and if one animal decides to lie down, then another animal decides to walk over, that's just too bad. But over here, when you walk down the street, you have no right to kick anything on the street. And therefore, the walking animal had no right to kick the animal that was lying down. And therefore, you'd be chayav. Okay. Next Gemara. This is a bit of a lively one. 619. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Not exactly such an easy Gemara. Let's try. Sharamazi. Okay. This really goes to Reb Tarfon that we saw. It's got to be at least 5 or 6 times so far. What does Reb Tarfon say? You have a Karen Bershus Hanizik. So let's in the mission. Sharamazi Bershus Hanizik. You have an animal that gores Karen in the domain of the victim. Ketzad, how did that happen? Nogach, it gored. Nogach, it pushed. Noshach, it kicked. Ravat, lie down. Bought, it kicked. Bershus Harabim in the public domain. Mishalem Chatzin Nezik, you pay half damages. However, if it's Bershus Hanizik, if it's in the domain of the victim, Tarfon says Nezik Shalom, you pay full damages. And the rabbis say Chatzi Nezik, you only pay half damages. 1 second. Tarfon says you pay full damages in Rosh Hashanah. The rabbi say half damages. Tarfon says we have a kal v'chomer. Let's examine this. You look at Shein and Regal, right? Shein and Regal in a public domain. What's the halacha? What's the law? Shein and Regal in a public domain. No payment at all. Shein and Regal is casual damage.
Oh.
Casual damage or pleasurable damage in a public domain, there's no payment at all. And yet, in the domain of the victim, how much do they pay? No, you pay in full. You pay in full. You pay in full. Now, when you look at Karen, right? Karen is abnormal. Abnormal pays half in the public domain. So if you can argue then that Karen is more severe than Shein and Regal, because Karen is liable both in public and in private, whereas Shein and Regal are only liable in private. So if Karen is liable in public, half payment, that should tell me that in private it should be at least as liable as Shein and Regal. It should be a full payment. Together?
Yep.
Certainly we should be machmer in the domain of the victim, on the victim's property, to pay full damages. The rabbi said to him, "Dai lovim and adin lias kanidin." Okay, here is the key idea. It's called dai. What does dai mean? What's the argument? The argument is, look, Karen is clearly more severe than Shein and Regal, because Karen pays half in the public in public, and Shein and Regal are completely exempt. Therefore, it should be at least as liable as Shein and Regal, which is full damages, in private. However, the counter argument is, Karen is its own type of damage. It's different than Shein and Regal. Karen is not Shein and Regal. As a matter of fact, if the Torah would have just said Shein and Regal, I would not know Karen. Karen is abnormal. Can't expect it. So the only way I know that the Torah says you're chayav on Karen is from the public domain, where you pay half. So therefore, you can say that it's no more than half, even in a private domain, because I don't know in the first place that you make a full payment. The only way I know that you pay anything is from public, where you pay half. So therefore, in private, you can pay no more than half. No, it'll be no more than half. It'll be no more than half. It could be well less than half, because the half payment is migufay. Right.
6 to 1/2 dozen of the other.
Just like the public domain is half, public, so too in private, in the area of the victim, it would also be half. Amar Lahem, Sir Tarfon says, Karen Karen, and he odin Karen Regal. I'm not trying to say that the source of Karen in the area of the victim is from Karen in the public area. How do I know that Karen pays in the private area? Is it because I learned from Karen in the public area? If that's the case, then we should say Dai, no more than Karen in the public area. Well, let's explain this. We'll skip for a second to the Gemara. The Gemara argues that if Miriam would have spit at her father, she would be a mitzvah, a leper, and have to go out of the camp for 7 days. Therefore, if she speaks ill of God, she has to go out for 2 weeks. Does that make sense? Not quite. But the limitation there is, well, how do I know that maybe it's always 7 weeks, 7 days? How do I know it's anything more than 7 days? So in other words, Karen, the only way I know Karen is from public where you pay half. I can't tell you anything more than half. So he says that I need Odin Karen and Regal. I actually learned it from Regal. In the location where you're lenient on Shane and Regal, but you don't pay anything, that would be in public. You're machmer on Karen. In a place where we're stringent about Shane and Regal, that would be in private, we should certainly be machmer with Karen as well. Since Karen is more stringent, it should have at least stringencies of a lenient category.
Yeah. Yes.
So they said dialogue is Canadian ultimately speaking, to argue that there should be any payment from Karen requires you to compare it to what happens in public. That, in other words, Karen is its own category. It's abnormal. Can't protect against it. Therefore, any argument you want to make to say that you should be chayav for Karen requires you to argue that Karen that Karen is chayav in the public area. And if Karen is chayav in public, half, then it should be chayav no more than half anywhere else either. Okay, so let's begin the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Reb Tarfon Leslie Daya. Clearly, Reb Tarfon is not impressed with this concept. But Daya Daraisa, Daya is biblical. The Tanya we learned. We didn't Kal V'chomer Kate said. How does the Kal V'chomer work? But Yomer Hashem al Moshe. God says to Moshe, Avia, her father, Yorak b'fanal. Let's say she spit at her father. How like to call him Shivas Yom? She'd be embarrassed for 7 days. Therefore, Kal V'chomer l'Shechina Arba Asur Yom. Therefore, certainly, the Shechina, when she speaks ill of God, it should be twice as long. Okay, why twice? Because there's thesis about this. Okay, let's say that God sort of contributes more to the creation of man than either the father, twice as much as either the father or the mother. Elo, what do we say? In other words, just since the halacha is that if that person who spits at their father, in other words, a basic leper gets locked up for 7 days. So too, even though she speaks ill of the Shechina of God, not just of her father, she also gets locked up for 7 days. That's because we can't change the core source. We can't change the core source. The source of it is the father for 7 days. Therefore, it's maximum penalty of 7 days. Even though the Shechina would have been appropriate for her to have a doubly severe payment. The Gemara says, Reb Tarfon has an interesting feature. When does he say that it's limited by the original source? That's when it doesn't get rid of the Kal V'chomer at all. One second. When the Kal V'chomer remains standing, Daya just imposes a limitation, then we do say Daya. Okay. So the Gemara explains. Hasam Shiva D'Shechina like Sivi. It doesn't. The Torah never says that if you speak ill of God, you get locked up for 7 days. Also Kal V'chomer, I see a ribser. Also Daya Afik Shiva V'uki Shiva. The Kal V'chomer says 14 days, twice as severe as her father. In other words, the Torah, we don't. If you make fun of, if you disparage a Shechina, we have no clue what happens. Mm-hmm. If you disparage your father, we know you get 7 days. You get locked up for 7 days, which tells me that the Shechina should be at least doubly severe, twice as severe. And then Daya says, no, it can't ultimately speaking be more severe from the father, which is a source that you get locked up for any period whatsoever. So therefore, Daya says V'uki Hashiva. Okay, so therefore, in other words, what do we know about disparaging the Shechina? 0. The Kal V'chomer says 14 days, twice as severe as the father, and Daya says no, equally as severe as the father. Daya means we limit the Kal V'chomer to maximally as severe as the source in the first place. So the source, in other words, if you disparage the Shekhinah, what's the penalty? We don't know. We know the penalty for disparaging your father is 7 days. Now, it would make sense for the Shekhinah to be twice as severe, but ultimately speaking, the original source is maximum of 7 days. And therefore, Daya says maximum of 7 days. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Aval Hocha, but let's examine our Gemara. This question of half payment in the area of the property of the victim. Aval Hocha, Chatzin as a ksiv. We already know that in the property of the victim, Karen would pay half damages. It's no worse than a public area. So the Kal V'chomer now says, in other words, we already know that Karen pays half payment, whether it's in public or it's in private. Now that we have a Kal V'chomer, we're saying that Karen should be at least as severe as a more lenient regular shein. So that tells me make another half payment, i.e. full payments. Idash is Daya, if you tell me that it can be no more severe than the original Karen, which is in public and pays half, if for Kal V'chomer, there is no Kal V'chomer at all. Together?
We're on the page,
A little less than halfway down.
first one line.
Daya, if for Kal V'chomer. If for Kal V'chomer. Yeah, Rabbanon. Are we together?
Well, yes, I was using the down south pronunciation, so I look quite a
Okay, let's try. Okay, V'Rabbanon Shiva de Shechina Ksivim. Okay, again, let's go through this again. What is Daya? Daya says no more than the original source. So, for example, what do we know about disparaging the Shechina? Nothing. We know that if you disparage your father, he gets locked up for 7 days. Now, technically, I'm using the words of the Gemara. It's not actually disparage. It's called mitzvah. It's when you get a leprosy and you have to go. Okay, whatever. That's technical aside. Okay, if you disparage your father, you get 7 days. It is worthy for the Shekhinah, for God's presence, to be twice at a minimum twice as severe as your father.
Somebody's just making that assumption.
That's a grounded assumption. The argument, the reason for that is because when a person is created in the womb, God contributes twice as much as either the father or the mother. That's you look at you can see Taisus Kal V'chomer Shechina Yudal Yom. Taisus explains where that assumption comes from. But okay, take that for granted. Okay. There's a granted assumption that God's presence should be twice as severe as what you say about your father. So therefore, it should be 14 days. Daya says, look, we don't know this to be the case. The only way we only know that disparaging your father gets 7 days. So therefore, we have to say the Shekhinah is no more severe. So you get 7 days. Okay. Rabbanon, the rabbis say Shiva de Shekhinah Ksivim, Tisko Shivas Yom. The rabbis say that no. We already know that for God's disparaging God, you get 7 days. So therefore, actually, the Kal V'chomer should tell me 14 days and another 7 days.
Oh.
And yet we'll still say Dayai. We'll still say that no more than 7 because the principal location of 7 is disparaging your father. For Tarfon Ahuta Sagar Darshin and Dayahu. Tarfon says that Tisagar of 7 days says that we actually we that tells us the concept of Dayai. Rabbanon Ksivi Krachmena Vatiska Miriam. Okay. In effect, the argument is as follows. Let's try to explain two scenarios. According to Reb Tarfon, okay, what is Daya? Daya in this case is we know nothing about the Shekhinah, 0. And now we want to say what happens when you disparage the Shekhinah, it should be at least 14 days. Because you disparage your father, it should be 7 days. And then we say Daya, no more than 7. Says we knew nothing, and now we know 7, which is an increase. it's 7 days longer. The rabbis say, no. We already knew the Shechina gets 7 days. So it would make sense, the Kavachimer would be that if you're for your father, you get 7, for sure for the Shechina, you should get an additional 7. But yet, Daya, we could say no more than 7. Even though Daya effectively means that we don't know anything. Doesn't make a difference. And that, in effect, is exactly what's going on in our Gemara. B'shus HaNezek, right? Private property. The guy comes in and gores. We know half. We know he pays half because it's no different than a public area. Now you want to say Kavachimer from Shein V'Regal that you should pay complete. The rabbis say Daya. And Tarvin says, no, there's no Daya here because if you say Daya, there's no Kavachimer. So therefore you don't say Daya. Make sense? Okay. Amr le Rapapa l'Abaya. So Rapapa says Abaya v'al high time l'darish Daya alfagav le'mifra Kavachimer. We have another opinion that does not say Daya, even where the Kavachimer is not completely destroyed. Okay. Now, in effect, this argument would be very problematic. Why? And the Gemara is saying here that everybody must hold a Daya. Why must everybody hold a Daya? Because we have the story of Miriam. How long does Miriam go into prison for? 7 days. Obviously, that must be because of Daya. But what?
Okay.
Rav Papa is saying, though, there might be an opinion that says that actually Miriam should have gone into prison for 14 days because we do not say Daya. The concept of Daya doesn't exist. Even in the scenario where the Kavachimer is still adding 7 days, like Rav Tarfon, you still don't say Daya. The Tanya we learned. Keri Bezov Minayan. Okay, so let's talk here about Tumas Keri, Tumas Zov. We spoke about this yesterday, right? We'll go through it again. We spoke about it many times together. Okay, Tumas Zov, he said, is a male emission that we currently do not understand what it is. Okay, Tumas Keri is a regular ejaculate. Standard seminal emission. Okay, now, if a person's otherwise tahor, right?
Okay, right.
Then Keri, seminal emission, is tamei maga, touching. It is not tamei if you carry it. Only if you touch it. If you have a zav, all the fluids of the zav are tamei b'maga ubemasa. His spit, his urine, everything. If you pick it up, you also become tamei without touching it.
Rabbi?
Yes.
You are about to unleash the fury and the wrath of strategic pun forces.
Tanya,
Keep drifting.
let's go. Gotta go. Let's go. We got a couple minutes here. Tanya, Keri Bezav Minayan. How do we know that okay, so carry a standard seminal emission by somebody who's a Zav, how do we know that it becomes Tameh? If you didn't know, it's Kavachimer. Ma Tohar B'Tohar. Tameh B'Tameh. Okay, what does this mean? If you have the spit of a person who's Tahar, his spit is Tahar as well. And yet by somebody who's Tameh, a Zav who's Tameh, his spit is Tameh. Right? Tameh B'Maga Ub'Masa. Touching and carrying. Tameh b'tahar, anadin she tameh b'tameh. A seminal emission, which is tameh, even by a person who's otherwise tahar, right? He basically needs to go to mikvah, he'll be tahar that evening. Certainly, a seminal emission of someone who's already tameh should also be tameh. Make sense?
Okay. It's a sin of emission. In other words,
however, this kavachimer is true both for touching and for carrying. Why don't we say that the kavachimer? In other words, we're saying that if a seminal emission is tamei by a regular person, for sure it should be tamei by a zav. But there's a difference. By a regular person, it's tamei only with maga, with touching. By a zav, we're trying to say it's tamei both touching and carrying. That we're saying the kavachimer is more than the actual source. This is a scenario of daya, and it's not a scenario where there's daya, where the kavachimer is destroyed, because we could say the kavachimer tells me the seminal emission of a zav is tamei. but only if you touch it. And Daya says, not if you carry it. If to tell me, I don't need a pasuk to tell me about maga, I would think that a zav is no worse than a regular person. So if a regular person's seminal emission is tummy, certainly a person whose tummy is all his seminal emission is also tummy. That's sort of self-evident. He is a regular person as well. The Gemara says that's not necessarily true. Because I would think mikre loylaksiv. When the Torah defines a seminal emission being tummy, misha carry of garamla yatzazesh ain't carry of garamla. Specifically, it has to be a person who is tahar. That's when his seminal emission creates a tumah. But if he's already tamei, maybe his seminal emission is not tamei. Okay. Shein Kerev Garmloi, El Davarach Garmloi. Okay. So therefore, I basically know nothing about a person who's a zav, whether his seminal emission is tamei or tar. And the Kavachimer is telling me not just that it's tamei maga, but also it's tamei masa. Clearly that we don't say dayai. So the Gemara says no, midi v'loy davarach b'sif. Okay, in a nutshell, what that means is no. In other words, a person who's a zav is also a regular person. So therefore, obviously, his seminal emission is tamei. And the Kavachimer here is to tell me that a seminal emission is not tamei. I already know, but that it's also tamei masa, carrying, which is like Rav Tarfon. This is like the opinion of Rav Tarfon. It's a scenario of daya when otherwise there would be no Kavachimer. Because if you didn't say daya, then we already know Tumas Maga because he's a regular person too. Besides being a zav, he's also a regular person. Together? Who's the opinion that says that a seminal emission of a zav is tamei masa carrying? Lo Rabbi Lazar, v'lo Rabbi Yeshua. It's not Rabbi Lazar, and it's not Rabbi Yeshua. The time we learned shichva zera shel zav, semen of a zav. Metame b'maga, it is tamei with touching, but metame b'masa, but not with carrying. Div Rabbi Eliezer. This is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Yeshua says af metame b'masa. It is also tamei with carrying. Because it isn't possible without a little bit of a ziva emission. So in other words, every shechva zera of a zav also has tumah zav in it, and therefore the tumah is carrying it as well. Rabbi Yeshua's argument is that every carry is also a zav. That's why it's tamei. Every time he has an emission of semen, he also has an emission of zav, which is not that. Zav is something else, which you don't know what it is. At least in today's day and age. Okay. One second. Okay, now our bias is clearly indicating that even without Tumah Ziva, Shechva Zera of a zav is still Tomei Magat. Still tamei masa. In other words, if you carry shechva zera of a zav, semen of a zav, there's still tumah, even without the fact that there might be a zav emission in it as well. So therefore, our brisa clearly contradicts both Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yeshua in arguing that shechva zera alone of a zav is sufficient to have tumas masa, tumah of carrying. Okay, so Mara says Elahai Tana, it's this author that's not we learned. The Malame had on top of this, Zoiv shall Zov, Roika v'Shechvazera umei miragel dam hanida. The Taman beim maga beim masa. The Zoiv of a Zov is Zov emission, or V'Roika his spit, or Shechvazera seminal emission, umei miragel or his urine, v'dam nida, or in the case of a woman, the blood of a nida. The Taman, the Tumah is beim b'maga beim b'masa, whether it's touch or carrying. So the Gemara says maybe the reason is like Rabbi. Maybe the reason of this price is like Rabbi Yeshua. The reason why carry of a zav, semen of a zav is tamei is because there's also zav with it. So the Gemara says, if that was the case, it should say zav and then it should say shechvazera. Semen. It should say Tumah Zav and then the Zav emission and then a seminal emission. because in effect the tumah of semen is exactly the same as the tumah of zav. Why is it that the tumah of semen is listed after the tumah of reik, of spit? It must be because it's its own category, and that's like our brayso. The tumah's carry, tumah of semen is the same, is tamei maga masa, just like the tumah of spit. Touch and carrying. Okay. Step in.
So we got here from.
We're looking for daya. And tomorrow we have another complicated Gemara about daya as well, which I'm not going to start because we're going to get stuck in the middle anyway.
So we never finished with the dog and whatever. We just jumped to it.
No. So what do you mean?
Oh, no, we did.
No, we finished with the dog. We went to the Mishnah. The Mishnah spoke about Chatzar and Nizik. The key idea of Chatzar and Nizik is daya. It's this Kal v'Chomer. Karen should be more severe in the domain of the private property. And the only counter argument is daya, which is that, yeah, true, but we don't know it, so not going to work, not going to fly. And now we're going through daya, and tomorrow we have another example of daya, which is also not so easy. Okay,